The air in the central issue facility smelled of aged canvas, industrial floor wax, and the faint, metallic scent of ozone from the humming fluorescent lights overhead. It was a smell unique to places of military supply, a perfume of readiness and bureaucracy that clung to the concrete walls and steel shelving units reaching up into the shadowy rafters. Dust motes danced in the long shafts of afternoon light slanting through the high, grimy windows of the warehouse. Anya stood in the line. She was a study in stillness, a fixed point in the slow-moving river of soldiers shuffling forward. Her posture was perfect, a straight line from her heels to the base of her skull, yet it held no tension. It was the settled posture of a structure that had found its perfect center of gravity and had no reason to move. She wore faded olive-drab cargo pants, worn soft at the knees and seams, and a plain gray t-shirt that had seen too many washes. Her running shoes were clean but old, the treads worn smooth in a pattern that spoke of thousands of miles on pavement and trail. Her hair, a nondescript brown with a few strands of silver at the temples, was pulled back in a severe, functional bun. There was nothing about her that demanded a second look. She was a ghost in broad daylight, utterly forgettable. Her gaze was soft, unfocused, but it missed nothing. She noted the specialist 2 places ahead of her, nervously retying the laces on his new boots, using a locking hitch that was standard for airborne troops. She saw the corporal behind the counter, trying to look busy by repeatedly straightening a stack of forms that was already perfectly aligned. She registered the subtle tremor in his hands, a sign of too much caffeine or too little sleep. She heard the squeak of a cartwheel from a distant aisle, the low murmur of a conversation about weekend plans, the sharp, percussive slap of a clipboard hitting a metal desk. Her senses absorbed it all without effort, cataloging the data, assessing the environment. It was as natural to her as breathing. The line inched forward. The soldier in front of her, a young private with fresh-faced enthusiasm, completed his transaction and walked away with a large duffel bag, a grin of accomplishment on his face. Anya stepped up to the counter. The man on the other side was a staff sergeant. His uniform was crisp, the creases sharp enough to cut paper. A name tag read Jensen. He was broad in the shoulders and narrow in the hips, a man who clearly spent his required time, and then some, at the post gymnasium. He carried himself with an air of unearned royalty, the petty king of a small, windowless kingdom of government-issued gear. 2 other soldiers, specialists, flanked him, leaning against the counter with practiced indolence. They formed a small, cohesive unit of bored arrogance. Sergeant Jensen did not look up immediately. He made a final notation on a form, his movements deliberately slow and exaggerated. He was performing his importance for an audience of 2. Finally, he lifted his eyes. They were flat, dismissive. He scanned Anya from her worn shoes to her plain t-shirt, and his lip curled in a barely perceptible sneer. "Help you?" His tone was not a question. It was a challenge. Anya placed a single, folded piece of paper on the counter. It was a standard issue request form. Her voice, when she spoke, was low and even, devoid of any inflection. "I need to exchange a uniform item." Jensen picked up the form, holding it by the very edge as if it were contaminated. He glanced at it, then at her. "This is for the new Army combat pant, female-specific design." "You sure you got the right form, ma'am?" The word "ma'am" was laced with a thick, syrupy sarcasm. He was looking at her civilian attire, at the lack of any visible rank, and had already completed his flawed calculation. In his world, she was a nobody. A dependent, maybe. A civilian contractor with delusions of grandeur. "The form is correct," Anya stated. It was a simple delivery of fact. There was no room for debate. One of the specialists, a lanky kid with a spray of acne across his forehead, snickered. "Heard those new pants are real flattering. Got more room in the, he made a vague gesture towards his own backside. Jensen smirked, feeding off the sycophantic energy. He tossed the form back onto the counter. "Look, we're backordered on those. Big Army wants every female to have a pair, so the waitlist is a mile long. You'll have to come back. Maybe next month." He turned away, a clear gesture of dismissal, and began shuffling another stack of papers. Anya did not move. She did not raise her voice. She simply waited. The silence stretched, becoming heavier, more pointed, than any shout could ever be. It was a silence that demanded to be filled. After a long 30 seconds, Jensen sighed dramatically and turned back, his patience now a theatrical performance of exasperation. Is there a problem? I told you, we don't have them. My request is priority requisition, Anya said, her voice still perfectly level. The authorization code is at the bottom of the form. Section 9, subsection Delta. Your inventory system should show a set held in reserve under that code. This gave Jensen pause. He snatched the form up again, his eyes flicking to the bottom. He saw the long string of alphanumeric characters. He would not know what it meant, but he understood that it was not standard. His arrogance warred with a flicker of uncertainty. Arrogance 1. Anybody can type a bunch of numbers on a form, he scoffed, though his voice had lost some of its bluster. I need to see some authorization. Where's your unit commander? Who signed this? The authorization is the code, Anya repeated calmly. She offered him an out. A chance to simply do his job, to follow the procedure he did not understand, and end the interaction. She was, in her own way, trying to protect him from himself. Just enter the code into the system. The second specialist, a shorter, more compact man with a belligerent set to his jaw, pushed himself off the counter. Hey, maybe she doesn't even need the female pants. How do we know? You gotta have the right equipment to need the special equipment, you know. He leered at Anya, his eyes running down her body in a crude appraisal. Jensen saw his opportunity to regain control, to re-establish his dominance in front of his subordinates. He leaned forward, resting his hands on the counter, his voice dropping into a conspiratorial, mocking tone. You know, he's got a point. Regulations are regulations. We have to verify the need. We can't just be handing out this high-speed gear to anyone who asks for it. Anya's expression did not change. Her face remained a placid mask, but her eyes, a pale, washed-out blue, seemed to sharpen, to absorb more light. She was observing the change in their tactics, the shift from bureaucratic obstruction to personal harassment. She was recalculating. My need is not your concern, she said. The words were not a threat. They were a boundary line drawn in the dust. Your job is to process the request. Process it. The finality in her tone, the sheer lack of emotional reaction, was something Jensen's simple worldview could not process. He interpreted it as weakness, as the last bluff of someone with no real power. He decided to call it. I don't think so, he said, a genuine, ugly smile spreading across his face. I think my job is to protect army property from misuse. And I think you're trying to misuse the system, he straightened up, puffing out his chest. In fact, I think we need a little proof. He looked from Anya to his two specialists, a silent, thuggish communication passing between them. They mirrored his smile. The mood in the immediate vicinity of the counter had curdled, turning thick and sour. The few other soldiers in the warehouse began to notice, their conversations faltering. They kept their distance, sensing the dangerous energy radiating from the three men. What kind of proof? Anya asked. Her voice was now dangerously quiet, a whisper of still air before a storm. Jensen gestured at her worn cargo pants. Those pants you're wearing. They look pretty loose. Maybe the standard issue would fit you just fine. Maybe you don't need the special treatment. He took a step from behind the counter, a clear violation of his workspace and her personal space. His cronies followed, fanning out slightly, cutting off any easy path of retreat. They were bracketing her. It was a classic, if clumsy, intimidation tactic. I think you should try on a pair of the standard male trousers, Jensen continued, his voice slick with false reason. We'll see how they fit. If they don't, well, then we can talk about your special request. Anya stood her ground. Her feet were planted shoulder-width apart, her weight perfectly balanced. You are making a serious mistake. The lanky specialist laughed. Ooh, a mistake. I'm shaking. Jensen moved closer. He was now less than an arm's length from her. The smell of his cheap cologne was cloying. The only mistake here is you, lady. Wasting my time. Now, are you going to cooperate, or do we have a problem? She said nothing. Her silence was her final answer. He took it as surrender. All right then, he reached out, his hand moving not towards her arm to guide her, but towards the waistband of her pants. Let's just get a look and see what we're working with. It was the line. The absolute, uncrossable line. He put his hand on her. His fingers hooked into the belt loop of her trousers, and he gave a sharp, contemptuous tug. The world did not slow down. Time did not freeze. But for Anya, perception accelerated to an impossible degree. In the fraction of a second that his flesh made contact with her clothing, she processed 1,000 details. The calluses on his fingertips. The slight tremor of adrenaline in his hand. The way his body weight was shifted forward, leaving him off balance. The smirks on the faces of his friends, their eyes alight with cruel anticipation. The collective gasp from the onlookers. Something inside her shifted. It was not a conscious decision. It was a flip of a switch deep in her brain stem, a protocol that had been drilled into her nervous system by a decade of relentless, brutal training. Her breathing, which had been slow and steady, hitched for a microsecond and then deepened, becoming silent, pulling oxygen into her blood without any visible sign of effort. Her shoulders, which had been relaxed, settled a fraction of an inch, aligning her skeletal structure into a perfect conduit for kinetic energy. Her eyes, which had been observing the scene, narrowed into hard points of tactical focus, her pupils contracting as she locked onto the immediate threat. Her entire body became an instrument of precise, economical violence. Jensen's tug pulled her pants down by several inches. The worn fabric slid over her hips, exposing the pale skin of her lower back and the top of her simple, utilitarian underwear. And something else. Ink. Etched into the skin just above her sacrum was a tattoo. It was not large, no bigger than the palm of a hand, but its design was stark and intricate. It was a stylized dagger, its blade wrapped by the skeletal wings of a bat. At the point where the hilt met the guard, a single, staring eye was embedded. To the ignorant, it was a strange, Gothic symbol. To the initiated, it was a ghost story made flesh. It was the unofficial, highly classified unit insignia of a special missions unit so secret that the official government position was that it did not exist. Jensen and his friends saw only a tattoo. They did not understand. They were still committed to their foolish course of action. His pull had brought her forward, into his space. It was his final, fatal error. Anya's left hand shot up. Not in a fist, but with her fingers extended and rigid. She did not strike his face. She struck the side of his neck, her fingertips impacting the cluster of nerves in the carotid sinus. It was not a punch. It was a neurological short circuit. Jensen's eyes went wide with shock. His brain, receiving a sudden, massive overpressure signal, reacted instantly. It told his heart to stop pumping so hard. His blood pressure plummeted. The world went gray at the edges of his vision. His grip on her pants slackened, and his knees buckled. He crumpled to the floor like a puppet with its strings cut, unconscious before he even realized he had been hit. He made no sound other than a soft, wet exhale. The entire action had taken less than a second. The two specialists stared, their brains struggling to catch up with the reality of what had just happened. Their leader was on the floor, motionless. The woman was standing exactly where she had been, her hand already back at her side. The lanky one recovered first, his shock curdling into rage. He yelled, an incoherent string of curses, and lunged at her. He was clumsy, leading with a wild, telegraphed right hook. Anya did not retreat. She flowed forward to meet him, moving inside the arc of his punch. Her left hand came up, deflecting his arm at the wrist, while her right foot slid behind his ankle. It was a simple, elegant reaping throw. She did not use strength. She used his own momentum, his own mass, his own anger. He was airborne for a moment, a comical look of surprise on his face, before he crashed onto the concrete floor. The impact knocked the wind from his lungs in a pained whoosh. He lay there, gasping like a landed fish. The third man, the short, belligerent one, had a moment of pure, animal terror. He hesitated. It was all the time Anya needed. She took 2 quick steps, closing the distance. He flinched back, raising his hands to protect his face. She ignored his head. Her right foot snapped out in a low, precise kick. The toe of her worn running shoe connected squarely with the peroneal nerve on the outside of his right thigh. The pain was electric, blinding. His leg ceased to exist as a functional limb. It simply went out from under him, and he toppled sideways, screaming, clutching a leg that was no longer responding to his commands. It was over. 3 men, all larger and heavier than her, were neutralized on the floor. The entire engagement, from the moment Jensen had touched her to the moment the third man screamed, had lasted less than 5 seconds. Anya stood in the center of the small circle of carnage she had created. Her breathing was even. Her expression was unchanged. She reached down, took the waistband of her cargo pants, and pulled them back up into place with a smooth, efficient motion. Then she stood, perfectly still, and waited. A profound, ringing silence fell over the Central Issue facility. Every soldier, every civilian worker, was frozen in place. They stared at the 3 men on the floor, then at the unassuming woman who had put them there with such terrifying speed and precision. They were seeing the impossible. It was like watching a librarian knock out a pack of wolves. Then, a new sound cut through the silence. The slow, measured clapping of a single pair of hands. From a side office, a man emerged. He was older, in his late 50s, with close-cropped gray hair and the deeply etched face of a career soldier. He wore the single star of a brigadier general on the collar of his uniform. He had been in his office, the door ajar, and had heard the escalation. He had seen the entire thing. He walked slowly, deliberately, toward the scene, his eyes fixed on Anya. He was still clapping. He stopped a few feet away from her. His eyes dropped for a moment to the unconscious form of Sergeant Jensen, then to the 2 men writhing in pain on the floor. He showed no surprise. He then looked back at Anya, and his gaze was one of profound, professional respect. And something else. Recognition. That was textbook, the general said, his voice a low baritone that commanded attention. Absolutely textbook. The carotid strike is a nice touch. Most people get it wrong, use too much force. Yours was surgical. Anya met his gaze but said nothing. She simply inclined her head a fraction of an inch. An acknowledgement. The general's eyes flickered to her lower back, to the small patch of skin that had been exposed. His expression tightened. He knew the tattoo. He knew exactly what it meant. He knew the stories, the myths, the classified reports that were read once and then burned. He knew he was standing in the presence of someone who operated in a world far above his own. He turned his head and addressed the stunned onlookers, his voice now booming with command authority. Somebody call the MPs. And a medic for these idiots. He then turned back to Anya, his tone dropping back to one of quiet deference. Ma'am, I am General Marcus Thorne, Post Commander. I apologize for the conduct of my soldiers. There is no excuse for what just happened. The use of the word ma'am from a general to a woman in civilian clothes sent a fresh wave of shock through the room. It was not sarcastic, like Jensen's had been. It was genuine. It was the way a soldier addresses a superior officer. A very, very superior officer. Anya finally spoke. They were given a choice, General. They always are, Thorne agreed, nodding slowly. And they always make the wrong one. The wail of a siren grew closer. 2 military police officers, both young and anxious, rushed into the building, their hands hovering near their sidearms. They stopped dead when they saw the scene, 3 soldiers on the floor, a crowd of silent witnesses, and their post commander talking calmly to a civilian woman. General, sir, the senior MP asked, his voice filled with confusion. Thorne gestured to the 3 men on the floor. Sergeant Jensen and these 2 specialists decided to assault this woman. Detain them. Assault, harassment, conduct unbecoming. I want the book thrown at them so hard it breaks the binding. The MPs looked from the general to the woman, then back to the men on the floor, who seemed significantly more beaten than a single, average-sized woman should be capable of inflicting. Sir, what were her injuries? The MP asked, pulling out a notepad, trying to follow his procedure in a situation that made no sense. General Thorne almost smiled. Her injuries. Son, look at her. She is not the one who was injured here. She is the one who delivered the lesson. He turned to Anya. If you'll come with me, ma'am, we'll get your paperwork sorted out. I'll handle it personally. He led her away from the scene, towards his office. As they walked, the whispers started among the onlookers. They were trying to piece it together. The general's deference. Her impossible speed. the way she had moved. Inside his office, Thorne closed the door. It was a Spartan room, tidy and functional. He gestured to a chair, but Anya remained standing. "I don't know your current status, and I am not asking," Thorne said, his voice low and serious. "But that tattoo signifies a certain skill set." Those men had no idea who they were dealing with. "They were told to stop," Anya replied. "That should have been enough. For a reasonable man, yes. But they were not reasonable men." He went to his desk and picked up the phone. He punched in a number. "This is Thorne. Get me the CIF manager." "Yes, now." He waited, tapping a pen on his desk. "This is General Thorne. I have a priority requisition form here, code 9 Delta. "Yes, I am aware of what it is. I have the operator here in my office." "Yes, the operator. You will release the reserved item to her immediately. No questions, no paperwork. My authority. Is that understood?" He listened for a moment. "Good." He hung up the phone and looked at Anya. "It will be brought here. Again, I apologize for the breakdown in discipline." Discipline was not the problem, Anya said. Arrogance was. They confused restraint with weakness. A common, and often final, mistake, Thorne agreed. He hesitated for a moment, then decided to ask. "Are you attached to this post? Or just passing through?" It was his way of asking if he was about to have a very powerful, very quiet problem to deal with on his base for the foreseeable future. "Temporary assignment," she said. The answer was deliberately vague, giving him nothing and everything he needed to know. It meant she was here for a reason, and that reason was likely far above his pay grade. There was a knock on the door. A flustered-looking captain, the manager of the facility, entered carrying a small, unmarked black bag. He avoided looking at Anya, his eyes fixed on the general. He placed the bag on the desk as if it were a holy relic. "General, as requested." "Thank you, Captain." "You are dismissed," Thorne said. The captain practically fled the room. Thorne pushed the bag across the desk to Anya. "Your item." Anya took the bag. She did not open it. She gave the general another slight nod. "Thank you, General." "Thank you for the demonstration," he replied. "My NCOs could use a refresher course on the dangers of making assumptions." The MPs would later file their report. Sergeant Jensen, upon regaining consciousness, was belligerent and uncooperative, until General Thorne paid him a personal visit in the holding cell. No one knew what the general said to him, but when he left, Jensen was pale, sweating, and utterly broken. He and the two specialists were recommended for a general court-martial. Their careers in the army were over. The official report would list the incident as an unprovoked assault on a civilian contractor attached to a special projects division. The details of the assault would be heavily redacted. As Anya walked out of the Central Issue facility, the bag in her hand, the soldiers and workers who remained parted for her like she was the sea. They did not stare directly at her, but they watched her from the corners of their eyes. They saw her differently now. She was no longer invisible. She was a mystery, a force of nature that had briefly, violently, made itself known. General Thorne stood in the doorway of his office, watching her leave. He did not salute. A salute would have drawn too much attention, and he knew that people like her did not appreciate attention. But as she passed through the main doors and out into the bright afternoon sun, he stood a little straighter, his shoulders squared. It was a silent, personal gesture. A sign of respect from one old warrior to another, acknowledging a level of skill and dedication he could only begin to comprehend. Anya did not look back. She walked across the vast parking lot, her stride even and unhurried. The sun was warm on her face. She had the item she came for. The interruption was over. The lesson had been administered. For her, it was just another Tuesday. The world was back in its proper balance. She got into a plain sedan, the kind used by government agencies all over the world, and drove away, disappearing back into the anonymity from which she had come. The quiet was restored. The professional had finished her work.